What is your "we will never speak of this again" moment? I got up one night to get some water and found that my teenage son was in the kitchen getting food. He was behind the kitchen counter, so I could only see him from the waist up. When he came around the counter into the hall, two things happened simultaneously. He noticed me, and his eyes grew wide in horror, and I saw that he was butt naked except for a pair of socks. He starts trying to panic run backwards on the tile floor. Imagine Scooby-Doo trying to run, but getting stuck in place in a flurry of limbs, but ended up slipping and taking a hard seat on the tile. Worst of all, he dropped his hot pocket. I made sure he was okay, then went back to bed and laughed my off. Years later, we were driving and reminiscing about funny memories. I said, "Do you remember that night?" and he cut me off with, "Yes." I didn't even have to specify which night. We knew, and we were silent. When I was 17, a huge photo radar ticket came in for my truck, something like 40 kilometers over the speed limit. My mom was furious at me. "How dare you drive like a maniac, I raised you better," and all that. But it turns out I wasn't the driver that day. Dad had borrowed it to pick something up. I asked him how much it was worth to him for me to take the fall, knowing she'd turn on him with the fury of her angry mama bear. And that's I got myself a new HD TV that year. My husband and I work at the same small office. We were the first ones in that morning, and other employees usually don't show up for another hour or so. There's only one bathroom on our floor as it's a small business. Anyway, I had just had some habanero spicy thing the day before, and I was in for some punishment on this particular morning. I'm talking doubled over, clutching your stomach. Your farts are fire punishment. I hear a knock on the bathroom door and I assume it's my husband. Hang on, I'm having the habanero squirts. I'll be out as soon as I can. I groan out between awful spitting sounds. I hear a female voice awkwardly reply, "Oh, okay. Sorry Stacy for pulling you into my terrible morning." My brother had an imaginary girlfriend with an imaginary Facebook profile. She would post loving, imaginary messages on his wall. I asked about her a few times, then got a little more persistent. After a while, I got suspicious and did an image search for her photos. They were for another person in another country. Also, no one ever saw the imaginary girlfriend. If someone asked me about her after seeing their loving Facebook exchanges, I would kind of imply that we'd met to spare my brother and myself embarrassment. Eventually, he stopped talking about the imaginary girlfriend and she stopped posting imaginary things. I will never ask what happened to her. I'm pretty sure he will never mention her again. She's still on Facebook. When my best friend died, we figured he would have liked a sky burial, kind of. So at the height of the funeral party, we released his ashes into heavens with a giant balloon. After a few meters of flight, the string has snapped and his remains covered the mourning crowd. Everyone made their best efforts to get very drunk as soon as possible. We will never speak of this ever. My father and I had a Cold War. There has been a tacit agreement never to speak of it, and we haven't. When I was a teenager, my mother found my hedgerow stash. Both parents confronted me with it when I got home from school, and of course confiscated it, and of course threw it in the bin. Or so I thought. Months later, I happened upon my collection, hidden at the bottom of my dad's wardrobe. Hidden from my mother, clearly. So I took it back and hid it in my bedroom. What's he going to do? Tell my mother I'd taken the he'd hidden from her that he was supposed to have thrown out, and he found it again and took it back and hid it, and I found it again and took it back and hid it. This went on for years, and it's never been mentioned, and it never will be. I had internal bleeding and really low blood pressure. I was in the hospital and instructed to not try to stand or walk since I'd faint. I didn't obey that. I went to take a piss and my girlfriend saw and chased after me. She caught up just in time to throw herself between me and the floor to prevent me from cracking my head open as I fell back unconscious, out, peeing all over everything on the way down. I awoke with her sandwiched between me and the tile floors, lying in a pool of my piss. And that's actually the moment I realized I should marry that girl. I did. But that's not the story I tell when someone asked, "When did you know she was the one?" My mom told me her Hitachi wand was a back massager. It disappeared when she found out I used it as one. My mom walked in on me getting a in high school. She immediately did a beeline in the opposite direction and said I didn't see anything. Then the girl and I went and ate dinner with them at our dinner table and we never spoke of it again. Similar to the story that's already been posted, my dad and I have been in a bong stealing war for several years. I guess it's over now that I moved out though. When I was 16 they found my bong and confiscated it, told me they were going to break it and toss it. A few months later, I found it in my dad's shed. Clearly it had been used since I last saw it. It was dirtier and also it was stored next to some very modern dad. So I took the bong back and of course he couldn't say anything because he was supposed to have broken it. But he found it in my car several weeks later and took it again. Then I took it back from a different hiding spot in the shed. We've never mentioned it and never will. The time I showed to my father because I thought it was shrinking. I was 17. At school I ate something for lunch that didn't sit well with my stomach. Next thing I know I'm in my classroom hunched over feeling like my stomach is combusting. I go into the bathroom to find that my has become short and black with the skin crusty and dry. It felt like it would rip off if you tugged on it a little. When I got home I was hysterical because I thought I would lose or that this was permanent. I decided to swallow my embarrassment and show my dad. We did nothing about it and eventually the skin went back to normal and grew back to an almost normal size. However is not as long as it used to be, both erect and flaccid. Still to this day I don't know if the food I ate was the cause of it. It was just a slice of pizza. My dad and I have never spoken of that day. The smoking hot guy I met the prior weekend asked me out and, naturally, I said yes. Because I'd just met him, I asked if I could drive and he said no problem. On the way to get some grub, we are cruising along with the perfect tunes playing in the car, windows down, on an absolutely beautiful night. He looks over, I look over, we are both just sparkling, you know? It was one of those moments where you want to take a mental snapshot. And then, I guess we must have driven through an area of something he was allergic to, because he sneezed a couple small ones, then with one massive blow, honked a huge wad of snot all over my windshield and dashboard. But, unbelievably, that's not the worst part. No, he pretended like it didn't happen, and went about talking, and scooping it up with his hands, and smearing it onto his pants. I was beyond mortified. I was throwing up in my mouth, my eyes were watering, and he didn't want me to pull over to get it cleaned up. We had to go to dinner like that, with snotty pants. Sigh. I ended up marrying him. We have never ever spoken of it again, not even 40 years later. One fateful night, when I was around 12, I woke up, and for some reason I was sure I was hella late for school. I threw on some clothes, and walked into the kitchen, still half asleep. What I saw in the kitchen was utterly confusing. My dad was standing there, chugging milk straight from the carton like a madman. I looked at him, but was too tired to be shocked. He on the other hand looked like he had been caught chugging milk by the ghost of Hitler. Then I looked up at the clock. It was 4 AM. I really didn't understand anything, except that I could sleep more at this point. So without a word I just turned around slowly and went back to bed. The look on his face still haunts me. I had surgery over the weekend and have been extremely constipated. Yesterday I was squatting over a toilet, crying with a jar of Vaseline sitting next to me. My friend, who had come to visit, opened the bathroom door and made eye contact with me as I was attempting to birth 5 days of fecal matter. She then slowly backed out and shut the door. Not me but my father's story. During WWII, my father was a photographer for the 9th Army Air Corps. Most of the time it was ground-based, but occasionally he flew. During the lead up to D-Day, he flew multiple missions in a bomber, converted to a stereoscopic camera, 3D imagery, platform. The bomb bay had been gutted, and the camera installed there. They would overfly France, and take pictures, until they either ran out of film or the Luftwaffe showed up. To minimize detection they flew alone with the escort fighters circling out over the channel. In event of an attack, they'd drop until they were skimming the waves and run for England, passing under the fighters who'd engage the Germans while they fled. This, of course, didn't have its risks, and on more than one occasion they'd be caught too deep into France or the German fighters would get the drop on them, and they'd have to man the guns. Crew size meant even the photographers had to man a gun. So with all that, here's the let's never speak of this again moment. They were still at a high altitude, one of the guns jammed, and the gunner took off his glove and ended up freezing his hand to the metal of the gun. He's yelling for help, and my dad goes over and says, "There's two ways to get your hand off. Either we yank it off and take the skin off your palm, or we use warm liquid." I know of only one source of that. "Never tell anybody about this," was said. Dad didn't keep his word, and thus was born the often told story of how my father pissed on a crewmate hand and the guy thanked him for it.